Someone You Should Know. A program about people you know and even more that you don't. Hosted by Stuart Sax, veteran, husband, father, and grandfather. Now, here's your host, Stuart Sax.
Well, welcome again to another edition of Someone You Should Know. As always, I am glad that you're with us again this week, as so many of you are every week. And I really appreciate all the comments and texts and emails and everything in between, telling us that you enjoy the show and also making suggestions of people that maybe we would like to have on the show. And thanks in part by our great producer, Christine Dean, who I thank very, very much for all she does every week in getting this program to you and making me look good from time to time. And also to one of our sponsors, Roy Cook over at the No Sweat Experts. We're transitioning now into the warmer weather. And now's the time to check out that heating and air conditioning system to make sure that you're ready to go for the summertime. You know the heat's coming. You know you're going to want that air conditioner to kick on when it does get warm. And call those folks over there at No Sweat Experts. They'll take really good care of you and keep you cool. I want to invite my guest into the studio right now. Britney Webb is with me. Hey, Britney. Glad to have you with us.
How are you?
Good. Now, folks, I want you to take a good look at this gorgeous young lady. And some of you are probably saying, oh, she must be a model, or she must be a Hollywood actress, right? Or maybe she's a fashion designer. She is a crime scene investigator. Now, everybody's probably right now that's watching and listening to this show saying, oh my God, I watched that on TV. She's one of those. You are one of those.
Without the white suit, but yes, I am one of those.
Yeah, that's your job. And for those who just watch it on TV, and I'm going to ask you in our conversation how realistic the TV version is, but tell people exactly what is a crime scene investigator and what are the duties that you perform?
So in my role as a crime scene investigator, I work at a local agency, the Frisco Police Department. And so we respond to major crime scenes that occur within the city of Frisco. Officers respond first. That's how it's a little bit different than TV sometimes. And then once they've secured the scene and everything like that, they'll call us out. Our job is to document the scene with photographs, measurements, diagrams. We have a 3D scanner. We collect evidence, process for fingerprints, do fingerprint comparisons. We don't have a DNA lab like they show on TV. So we actually send that to, there's some local labs we send it to, and it takes much longer than it does on TV. We testify in court. So it's similar but different. It's not quite as fast-paced as they show on TV.
Well, and what we do see on TV often is when there is a crime, as you say, the police usually respond first. They're the ones that put the yellow tape up around the trees and to make sure that nobody compromises the scene. Is it then your job to go on the scene and make sure that nothing is touched until you and your team are finished?
Yes.
And then is that correct?
Yes.
So and the reason for that is.
So we're responsible for collecting and documenting that scene, and so our first job that when we get there is we kind of do a little walkthrough and notate items of evidence that are obvious and like the responding officers might have seen, and we have to document it before anyone else opens a drawer, opens up anything, because that's how it was when we got there. And then once that's done, we'll put evidence markers down like you see on television with the evidence marker 1 and 2. So we put those down after we take initial photos. And then once we've done all that, that's when detectives and stuff can start going through drawers and opening things and start moving things. But we have to document it first, just because when we go to court, the pictures that we take is what the jury has to kind of give them a visual of what the scene is. We can't bring them back usually. And so our photos are very important for the jury to understand kind of what that scene looked like.
So let's set up a scenario. Let's assume that this was a vehicle. Say that somebody, maybe they, and we don't know necessarily, but let's assume maybe the driver fell asleep at the wheel and they jumped a curb and they hit a tree or so. The police respond first. Medical teams come to see if there's anybody that needs medical attention and all. Then you are called in and you have to go through to then scope the scene and determine, do you help determine whether it was the fault of the driver or if it was maybe the fault of the car? Maybe there was a tire blowout that caused the accident. Are you the people that kind of help set the scene that this was an accident or this was on purpose, or maybe it was a brake failure or something?
So you brought up an interesting scenario with a vehicle. So one thing that we aren't experts in is vehicle, how they mechanics work and stuff like that. So actually our traffic unit, it goes to all the reconstruction classes for traffic accidents and stuff like that. And so we do go on traffic accidents, but our sole purpose is to document that scene. We are the most trained. A lot of accidents happen at night. I know you're shocked, and the lighting isn't great. And so we have a lot of training and taking pictures at night to kind of light up the scene. We have to do timed exposure and stuff. So you have to know a little bit about the camera. So the traffic unit usually relies on us to come out and not only document the scene, how it looks at that time, but also to light it up so you can actually see a lot of stuff around the scene, especially if it's a poorly lit street or something like that. But our traffic investigators with a vehicle would do all the tests and if the brakes are functioning and all that kind of stuff. If they needed it fingerprinted, that's when we would do our job. If they needed DNA swabs collected, sometimes we'll cut parts of the car out depending on what the scenario is. We might cut pieces of the car off or interior parts of the car off and send it off for testing, or we're trying to get fingerprints, and it kind of just, every case is different. So it's kind of what your scenario is and what you're trying to prove. Because not only do we prove or try to collect evidence of what did happen, but sometimes there's evidence that shows something that didn't happen. So we're kind of looking for what that scene's telling us is kind of our role in the scenario.
So in the case of a court setting, and they were talking about the driver, let's say the driver, survives this crash, goes back and says, listen, I hit the brakes and the brakes weren't there. It was the fault of the manufacturer and I'm going to sue the manufacturer and all. You are the ones that were out there taking the pictures of every angle of that car in order to use as evidence in that case, correct?
That is correct, yes.
What kind of training do you go through in order to do this?
So I'll tell you about how I got into this field. I was actually enrolled, getting my bachelor's degree in biology. I wanted to be a pediatrician, and I ended up taking a forensics class as an elective, and I really enjoyed it. No 2 days are the same. It's just very interesting. And so I graduated with my biology degree, and I just went the forensic option. And I was very fortunate. This is a very hard field to get into because it is very popular on television shows. And so I interned at the Garland Police Department my last year in college. And so when I graduated, I was, again, very fortunate. And they hired me once I graduated. So that's how my career began. So I had a little bit of training in college classes. One of my teachers worked as a DNA analyst at a lab. We had a teacher that worked as a trace evidence analyst at a lab. So we had people that actually still worked in the field. And so once I graduated and started in Garland, we had a whole, just like officers go through a field training program, the same thing for crime scene. So you don't start day one and go out and work a murder. You have to go through all the different chemicals that unit has, the different calls you'll respond to, what kind of, the different steps that you take on different kind of calls. We're probably going to approach a burglary scene different than we're going to approach a death investigation. Some steps are the same, but some are different, and different parties come out based on what kind of crime scene it is. So it's all field training, hands-on training, and then just like officers, we get cut loose, and then you're on your own and you start your shift, and the calls that come out on your shift, you're going to.
And I guess it's safe to say that no two calls are identical.
Yes, that is very true.
They're all different. All right. So the next thing in my head says to me, how strong of a constitution do you have to have if you have to go to a murder scene or an auto accident where there are either deaths or people injured and the presence of a lot of blood?
Mm-hmm.
How easy?
It can be difficult. It's not for everybody. Even after I started Garland, we had interns, and it's a good opportunity because you can think you want to do this job, and then you go out on a call and someone has been deceased for 6 months in a house with no air conditioning in the middle of the summer, and it is,
Whoa.
you cannot get smells on a television show. And so there are sights that we see and smell that they can't portray on TV. And being lucky enough to have an internship and the people that have, you can kind of figure out if you can do it or not. But the good thing about the crime scene forensic field is we respond to the scene, we're collecting evidence, but there's a whole group of people that work in a lab, and some do DNA analysis, some do toxicology. So it's maybe going out at 2 a.m. isn't your thing. You want a more 8 to 5 job. There's jobs in the lab that you can do. So forensics is a huge umbrella that has just so many opportunities for to focus on people's different strengths. So I think that that's what's really neat about it is there's a lot of opportunities based upon your background and what I couldn't do toxicology all day long. I like going out, I like taking the pictures, I like collecting the evidence, but we need that person running that machine. So everybody plays a very important role in our field.
Do you sometimes, in the case of outdoor events like accidents, fires, and things like that, do you incorporate drones into your investigation process?
We're getting to it. We haven't used it on a scene so far. I know our traffic unit has. Lately, we have a 3D scanner, which we share with the traffic unit, and it maps the whole scene. And we've been very fortunate. All the ones we've had have been interior scenes. But if we did have an outdoor scene, we could use drone data to incorporate with our 3D scans. And you can use Google Maps and overlay. The technology is amazing, and it's advancing a lot over the last few years. So it's really neat. You can really make a jury member feel like they are at the scene, which is what they need. They're making, life and death decisions. And so you want to give them as much information to make that decision.
Right. Well, because we have a mutual friend, Rad Rotello, and all, who is very active with drones. And I know he has talked a lot about that. Sometimes it's a drone that can be the first, if you will, police officer on the scene to assess what the situation is before the physical police and CSI people and all arrive in order to do their jobs and all. So I know that's the technology that is getting more advanced all the time. So, what do you do? Sit in an office and you're pushing paper all day and you're waiting, and all of a sudden it's like a fire department. The bells go off and you hop in the vehicle and you're off to the scene.
Yes, we're a very reactive unit. We wait until people unfortunately do bad things, and then that's when we get the call. So yeah, like I said, we do fingerprint comparisons. We have a really nice lab here, and so we can do processing with chemicals to try to get fingerprints. We collect evidence. Sometimes on some of the more smaller crimes, we're not a huge unit. We're not 24/7 staffed. So some of our officers will process scenes for us or collect evidence, and then we'll get them when we come in and process it. So we definitely, there's no set day. You might plan on, like I run our unit, so I have to approve all the reports. And so there's some days I come in and I plan on getting on this stack of reports done, and it never seems to go the way I think it's going to go.
So on the scene is really only part of the job, because after you get the on the scene, you've got to process all of that in order to send to all the various agencies that are going to be involved in the subsequent steps of that case.
And on bigger scenes, we make a sketch, we have evidence logs, measurement logs, just like everything. We document everything, usually to the fullest extent, and all of that is to help us. Most of our cases don't go to court for 2-3 years, and so it's not only helps us keep track of everything we did and what got processed and where it went and where we got it from, but also it helps a jury. Item 1 was this, and they, it went to the lab, and so it helps tell that whole story of the case.
Well, when you say it could be a couple of years delay and all, then sometimes when that witness gets on the stand and says, well, yeah, I don't really remember, it was so long ago, that's the evidence that the court needs and has to come up with in order to set that scene and say, here, this is what's been documented. Mm-hmm. And I brought up a scenario of an auto accident, but there's lots of other things. There could be a fire. You're called out to investigate fire scenes too, correct?
So our fire department has arson investigators, and so they are actually sworn. They have badges, and they work under the fire department, and they have been specially trained on how to figure out arson scenes, what to collect. We have a little bit of training, but they definitely have much more. So when they contact us, it's usually they're asking us to fingerprint things or try to process things for fingerprints. Is usually when we get called out on an arson scene.
And of course, nobody likes to think of homicides, but they do happen from time to time. And is that an extensive process when there is a homicide that you're called to the scene? Yes,
and it depends. It could be where they happen to find a deceased person in a field, and so there's really when you initially respond, there's really not too much to go on. But then as a investigation goes on, there might be a search warrant done at this house and a search, once they start finding out more and more information, that's usually when the scenes start adding up over time. Sometimes you go out and you only have that one scene and that's all you process. But a lot of times there's additional scenes over days, weeks, months, years, depending on how long it takes, to figure out as much as they can about what happened or what led up to that, So maybe something happened 2 weeks prior, which is what caused the suspect to want to harm that victim. And so we've got to try to get as many facts as we can to try to help the detective tell that story of what kind of led up to the offense.
Well, I'm an old TV watcher and all, and so if you go on to a scene where there's footprints leading up to the scene, do you really take plaster castings of the footprints?
We can. It really depends. Sometimes we'll see shoe prints, and sometimes it's the first responders that are going in and doing life-saving measures, and they're not.
You have to separate those footprints.
So sometimes we can tell pretty quickly it's an officer or fire department shoe. Sometimes you can tell really quickly that's definitely not a shoe. That's looks like a work boot, so that doesn't look right, and we'll cast it, we photograph it, all that kind of stuff. There could be tire tracks. You never know exactly what could be important, so you really need to try to get everything.
So you really are putting together the pieces of a puzzle that has to be put together, and to make sure that scene is well represented by the pieces that you and your team photograph. Because what happens if they say, well, you know what, we're not exactly sure what the point of entry was. they have to rely on you to say, well, we took the photos and we think the point of entry was not the door, it was the window.
Mm-hmm. Like all these windows were locked, and that's the only one that's not locked. And the dust on the windowsill also appears disturbed. So all those kind of facts start leading someone to what is the most likely, set of circumstances. Our job is definitely to collect the facts. And so if we get a fingerprint, that fingerprint is on that coffee cup. It's then for the detective that's assigned the case to talk to that person and figure out, like, is it the victim's friend? And that's why their fingerprint got left on it. Is it someone that's never talked to the victim? So that's really, I think, one of the biggest disparities with television is crime scene is really fact-based. We really don't have, unless you're doing bloodstain pattern and you're an expert, which we are not in Frisco, but we know how to document it and we understand it, but we're not going to tell you this stain is this and it was caused by that. So we're just collecting the facts, and then a detective will take those facts and kind of try to figure out what happened. So they can testify to their opinions. We're usually testifying to facts, if that kind of makes sense.
Do you ever get into a situation where maybe they perceive something happened one way, but you go back to those photos and you say, we're not so sure that that's the way it happened? So you have to kind of, mesh the two trends of thought to come up with the correct answer?
I think so, and I think that that's what makes the best team is it's not one person doing everything. It's definitely a meeting of the minds, and I think if you can get people that can talk and discuss different options, it helps you come to the best conclusion as to what is the most likely event that happened, just based upon, like, maybe I worked a scene that was really similar 10 years ago and this scene reminds me of it, and I say something which might spark something in the detective's mind. And so I just think that cooperation, that teamwork is when a scene gets worked the best.
You bring up a good point. Is it possible that, let's assume we're talking about a burglary, and you go on the scene and all to determine some things about the burglary. Then all of a sudden, a week later, there's another burglary, not too far away, and then maybe a third. So now the police determine that maybe we have a serial burglar out there. Is that also something that you and your investigators also say, yes, we notice that this, and this are common in all of these cases?
Yeah, and it can happen, especially the bigger the city is. So if it's split up where officers are in different sectors of the city.
Right.
And so we're going out on every burglary, and so we might notice that those similarities, and the officers only work their sector. And so if that crime happened in the sector next to them, they don't realize it did. And so we're like, yeah, this reminds us of the one we had because they broke in the back door this certain way. They only went through this area of the house. And sometimes we can even, I had a case once where, and you can't prove it's the same, but I was getting glove prints on a lot of different scenes that had the same method of entry, the same type of items were stolen and stuff. And they all had similar glove prints that we could find on the scene. So
it must be fascinating because it's like a little mystery that needs to be solved, each one of these. And you're responsible for helping to resolve the mystery. I keep thinking of that game that I played as a kid called Clue.
yeah.
And to solve the mystery, you have to have the clues. Well, you and your team are the people that go out to collect the clues in order to solve the mysteries.
Yep. It's very similar. We dressed up as Clue characters one year for Halloween, so we get the closeness of it.
How long have you been doing this, Britney?
Almost 16 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, what is the crime scene investigation techniques or process today as compared to what it was 16 years ago?
A lot is,
for one thing, probably the photographic process is a lot easier with digital photography.
I was very fortunate, and I got to start with digital photography. So I'm very fortunate. I worked with some people that had to use film cameras, and they would not know if their pictures turned out until they're
If it was
developed.
processed, yeah.
You've already left the scene, and it's too late. If they're all overexposed, they might be all gone. So we're super fortunate. SD cards are cheap, so we definitely take more pictures now than I'm sure they did 20 years ago, because we don't always have to develop the film.
Right.
A lot of times, we can just take the CD to the courthouse or the SD card, and they play the pictures from that. The 3D scanning has been a huge improvement over the last few years, because when we employ that 3D scanner, it measures everything it can see. Millions and millions of measurements. So sometimes, based on information that we're given initially, we would measure, the items we collect and stuff like that. But once they get more witness accounts, and now we have so much video evidence that is very helpful now that we didn't have, several years ago. Almost everyone has a Ring camera, which can be so helpful in helping solve crimes. And that's almost turning in its own little job that needs to be done, as someone that just focuses on collecting video. It's so much that's really a full-time job for someone. But if we didn't get a measurement, we didn't realize it was important. Maybe the distance between the television and the door, once they get information, is very important. We didn't know it then. That 3D scanner, we can go in the software and get that measurement whenever we need to. So it's really nice to know it's all there, even if we didn't realize it was important initially. And just the amount of DNA you need now is much less. Like, you hear all the time cases with touch DNA. When I first started, you couldn't even get a lab to do anything for touch DNA. You had to have a blood sample or a water bottle that might have saliva on it. It had to be something like that.
Hair follicles, things like that were picked up from the scene.
And then genealogy, to me, has been a huge, it's a new step in crime scene, and just all these old cases that they're being able to solve using genealogy. So that's kind of like a new niche that's starting. It's really neat to see how many old cases are getting solved using it.
So you're not doing the same thing over and over again for 16 years. You're constantly updating and upgrading your ability to do the job even better.
Well, yeah, because with how sensitive DNA has gotten, there's the very real chance that we could leave our DNA. So just how we, if we're swabbing something, we wear a mask now, where when I started we didn't, because you have to worry about breathing or coughing or just inadvertently leaving evidence that you can't even see you're leaving. So it's getting so sensitive that you really have to start thinking about stuff like that.
It's amazing. Well, there's something that we need to share with the people that are listening, and especially those that are watching, is because your unit is a rather unique unit, and I'm going to ask Christine to share that on the screen, because your CSI unit is an all-female unit.
We are.
And it's been that way for how long?
Oh, before I got here. It's always been female, always.
Now, is that unique just to our area, or is that being more common around the country than we even know?
I think it's a lot more common than people would think. Before I got to Frisco, I worked at Dallas PD in the crime scene unit, and there were we definitely had a decent amount of males in the unit. They were still sworn; they were detectives, and so the way that Dallas is transitioning is, as detectives rotate, either retire or rotate out of the unit, they replace them with a civilian, which is what we call it. We're not sworn; we don't have guns and badges, and so that's definitely seems to be more female heavy in most of the units around this area and kind of across the country, from what I've seen.
There's your team out there. It's amazing to me, because I think that the initial reaction was that you got to have a pretty strong stomach to do this kind of work, and it's probably something that would be probably leaning more towards male oriented than female oriented. But on the other side of that coin, I think that you as females are probably as investigative, if not more so, than maybe some men. I mean, certainly when I think about a hospital, the amount of blood and issues that nurses have to deal with before the doctor walks into the room, you got to have a strong constitution for that. And so, and it's always been an all female
Yeah,
team.
since it began, yeah.
Now, if you're called out to an accident scene or a homicide scene or something, does the whole team go, or do you determine 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of you need to go?
So like I said, our unit's not staffed in the building 24/7, but someone's always on call. And
Okay.
so the way our unit works is the person who's on call is on call from Monday morning at 8 in the morning to the next Monday morning at 8 in the morning. And so any call that requires crime scene, they're going to get the initial call from our dispatchers. And like I said, if it's 2, 3 in the morning, they get woke up, and dispatch is always so nice to us and understanding. And they're going to initially respond. They're going to contact me and let me know what kind of call it is and stuff like that. Usually, if it's a homicide or something like that, I'm going to come too. And then once me and that person discuss, like, is this a scene that the 2 of us can work, or do we need another person? Are there other scenes? Is there a vehicle that got away that they arrested someone out of that needs to be processed? So it kind of depends on how that scene's unraveling as to, especially big scenes, are the 2 of us enough, or do we need to start calling in more people? So, but usually if it's some kind of burglary, for the most part, that person that got called out can handle that by themselves.
Well, now we live in an area that is growing faster than anybody ever thought. So the one thing that comes to mind is there are construction sites everywhere. And construction sites very often mean construction accidents. And so if there is ever an accident on a construction site, is it there also a need for you and your investigators to go to construction sites to investigate that too?
Yes, and we've had a few. Like you said, there's a bunch of construction going on in the city, and we've definitely had a decent amount in the last few years that we respond to. We document it at some point, because it is a construction site. At some point, OSHA is going to come out and do their own investigation on it. Everyone that we've done, OSHA's come out much later than we've been on scene. And so they'll meet with the detective, and they might use our pictures and stuff like that, because we usually leave the scene, say it is unfortunately a construction accident where someone is deceased. We usually leave once the deceased person is taken by the medical examiner's office. That's usually, when we're done with that scene at that moment.
And in that scenario, I mean, by the time you get in there to investigate the scene, you've had police, you've had fire, you have ambulance, you have all kinds of people that are there on the scene. They do their thing. The ambulance leaves, and the fire trucks leave, and all. Now you've got to go in there and sort out, like you said, all the various people that were there in order to find the pieces that say what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
To pay it for. Wow, that's
we have to be very detail oriented in this line of work. So
well, and is part of that because you have to go specifically by a protocol. Because if there's any little piece that you might miss, that could work differently in a courtroom. The defendant who was started the fire and everything, if there was a piece of evidence that was overlooked or mishandled or whatever, that could be enough to get the case thrown out and a criminal walks free.
Yeah, we have we're very methodical. We have our accepted procedures, and so we follow that, and we're methodical, like to the point of, if I'm taking overall photos of a scene, I always go left to right when I'm taking my overall photos. And so I know that about myself. And so it's very, very easy to know, like if I'm looking at pictures, they're always going to go left to right. If for some reason I went right to left, there's going to be a specific reason, why I changed up my normal procedure. But all of us are very methodical. We have our way that we do things. Sometimes the weather might be getting bad and we might have to collect evidence quicker than we normally would because of the weather. But like I said, when we kind of go out of our normal steps, there's a reason. And we are able to explain, normally we would have done this and this, but it was about to rain and we needed to get that evidence collected so that we wouldn't lose anything.
That was one of the follow-up questions that I had, is because in a case of auto accidents, sometimes it's because of inclement weather. And you show up at a scene and it's pouring rain, and that some of this evidence is being washed away. And so you've got to, you still have to follow a protocol to show that in spite of the elements, you have to piece together a story.
Yes.
It's fascinating work. I can understand how you would get into this. And you've been doing it a while. And you're a married lady too.
I am, yes.
And is your husband a crime scene investigator also?
No, he's a detective actually at a different agency.
Oh, okay. So you guys
But he treats his crime scene people very well because he knows he better appreciate them.
Now, do each of you bring the office home at night and talk about it? Oh, I had a tough day. I had to go out to this crime scene, and do you talk about it off work?
I think a little bit, and I think that's a part of, like you said, we see some things that are not, great to see. People sometimes treat each other how they really, really shouldn't, and that's just part of, I think, that coping mechanism that you cannot internalize everything. If you do, you're never going to have a long career. It's just too much. You have to have an outlet. And it is nice to have someone that understands this job to bounce ideas off of. And sometimes when he's had a case, we're able to talk about, what evidence he might need to send to the lab on his case, just based upon, my knowledge of what I do. So I think it actually makes for a pretty good teamwork and helps. And just crime scene in general, we are kind of a pretty close network. So even the people that work at McKinney crime scene and Grand Prairie crime scene, we all try to get together several times throughout the year and discuss cases. And on this case, I swabbed this area, and when I went to the lab, we actually got a profile, and that's what helped, identify a suspect. So I think us talking and sharing things that we've seen and done make us all better.
Well, and that's actually how we first met. There was a conference being held in Frisco with officers and people from all aspects of law enforcement and fire that were meeting to discuss techniques and things in order to share that information. Because only through that kind of sharing knowledge and all do you continue to improve and also find out what are the latest techniques. And there were several companies that were there at that conference that were saying, this is the latest technique in photography. This is the latest technique in crime scene, collection, which is constantly changing. So when you and your husband are not doing law enforcement and crime scene investigation and all, what do you like to do? You got any hobbies?
We like to travel, so it's kind of been postponed a little bit the last few years, but hopefully we'll get to go on our trip finally this year. We have 4 dogs, which is a lot. So we take care of them. Just really trying to, relax. I like to read books and stuff like that. So
You don't read mystery novels, do you?
Yes, I do. I love ID channel. I think this career field, it's not just my career, it's my passion. And so I really do like watching different ID channel shows. I'm going, CrimeCon is at the end of April. I'm going to that. So I've never been before, so we'll see how that goes. I'm excited about that. But for instance, I watched episode, I think it was 2020. I don't remember if it was 2020 Dateline. And it was a case in Fort Worth. And they talked about, it was a genealogy case. and I was watching, it was a Friday night, and they mentioned the lab. And that night I got on their website and emailed the company. And Monday we had a phone conversation, and I had never heard of that lab before. And now I've talked to the owner, and we know what they are capable, the new technology that that lab is bringing. And so I like watching them anyways, but it actually in that instance helped us find a new lab that we might be able to potentially use new technology for. So.
Well, I alluded at the beginning of our conversation a little bit about what we see on TV. How realistic? I mean, gosh, it started with just CSI, and now you got CSI New York and Miami and Vegas and how realistic are these shows in following the protocol that you do on a daily basis?
I think they're pretty good. They use decent terminology. Like, you can definitely tell that they have people that have worked in this field, helping them come up with how they are saying this lab report results and stuff like that. What's a little bit different, especially in Frisco, is we don't have a lab. So on like CSI Vegas, they have a lab. And so they're doing the crime scene, they're bringing it back and getting the results right away. It's not like that. We have to send, like, if we send DNA off, it depends what kind of case. It could be 6 months, 8 months, a year until we actually get the lab report from that.
Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I wish we got them as quick as they did on TV. That would be amazing. But usually on TV, like, they have one person and they're doing multiple people's jobs because that's more exciting. You like watching them get the evidence and then they test it. That's not typically how it is. If I swab something for DNA, I'm sending that DNA to a DNA expert and they're running it. If I collect trace evidence, it's going to a trace evidence expert to get looked at. So they kind of just shorten the episode and make it, I think, a little bit more exciting for the viewer. Is they will have one person doing multiple tasks that are usually several different experts are doing all those things.
Well, TV often likes to embellish the scene a little bit more too, but I think it's only logical that they would have, investigators, professional investigators, as consultants on the set in order to make sure that it is as realistic as possible, like they do with a lot of the medical shows too.
But if you watch Forensic Files and stuff like that, that's definitely a lot more realistic. They usually have, case detectives and crime scene experts and lab experts talking about what they did. So that's definitely the most accurate because they're telling you what they did and what evidence they collected. CSI is a lot more sensationalized. But it's still, a lot of what they do is very realistic. A lot of the tests that they run, the chemicals that they're talking about are chemicals that we use on scenes. So,
well, and another thing that I think it helps do is it presents the realistic things that are going on in light to people, so that they know what happens when a crime occurs. That these things don't just pop up. That they are planned for. Brittany, it took me.
Can I tell you one thing real quick? And I just
sure go.
One
by the way, folks,
we're all fingerprint people, so all my fingerprint people will hopefully appreciate this. So on CSI, when they run prints, number one, they usually only have a few marks. We need a certain amount of detail to run a print. So TV makes it look a lot more like every print we lift is able to be run in the database. Okay. That is not reality. I wish it was. But even once we do run a print in the database, the person putting it in is actually telling the computer the different minutiae and details that they see in the print. And then when it's run in the computer system, the computer sees it as like an algorithm. They don't actually see the print like we see it. And then it comes back with a candidate list of 10 to 20 people. And we have to look at each candidate and decide if we think it is a potential match. On TV, the computer tells you it's a match, and it tells you the person's at Home Depot buying gloves right now. We have to do that. And then also, just as like a protection, if I put a print in and I get a possible match, I'm not telling the detective yet. I need to get another crime scene criminalist person that does fingerprints to agree with me And so once two people have agreed on that ID, then we tell the detective. So that's where CSI is very off, is they make it seem like the computer tells you it's a match. And I promise you, you do not want that. You want a person looking at it.
It's like a radiologist always wants to call in the consult in order to verify what they see, to make sure that it's correct. We scrolled across the screen. If you have any questions about crime scene investigations and everything, B Webb at Frisco, Texas, spelled out .gov. There it is along the bottom of the screen. Britney, hey, thanks for taking the time. It's an exciting career that you have and you have had, and I wish you the best of luck. And I guess the one thing I could hope for is that the phone doesn't ring that often. And,
like I said, I was very lucky how I got in this field, and I recognize that. And so anything that I can do to help people that want to be in this field and have the passion, I want them to get into this field. That's what we need. We need people that are hungry to get the facts and, all that kind of stuff. So I like being able to help people because I know people help me get to where I'm at. So that's what we're supposed to do.
If there are young people, or you have young people and all that are looking for an interesting and challenging career, they might want to consider, crime scene investigations. Reach out to Britney. Thank you very, very much, dear, for being with me. I applaud what you do. Keep up the great work for our community.
Well, thank you so much. And he kind of didn't go into, I met Stuart, he was volunteering. Him and his wife were amazing and helping us at our conference and being there every morning and checking people in. So I don't think you probably give yourself enough credit, but you guys helped us so much. That conference was so successful. And it was
COVID kind of blew it out, but I hope that once we kind of get things a little more normalized, you'll have that conference again and we'll be able to assist.
Oh yes, we will definitely call you.
All right, go out and be yourself because everyone else is taken. I like to say that. Go out and do that. And thanks again for tuning in. Be here again next week for another edition of Someone You Should Know. Thank you, Britney.
Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
Someone You Should Know.